Welcome, everybody, to the online launch of the second iteration of WBA's Financial System Benchmark. It's a pleasure to have you here today, listening in. This is an assessment of 400 of the world's most influential financial institutions. My name is Nikki Gwilliam-Bahari, and I'm Head of Stakeholder Engagement at the World Benchmarking Alliance. I'll be leading us through this event today, but I want to start by really thanking Capitals Coalition for hosting the session. We've got an hour together, and I'll provide a few opening remarks, but then I'll hand over to Mark Goff, who you can also see on the screen, who's the CEO of Capitals Coalition, who will also give some opening reflections. But then we'll get into the heart of it all. We have Pernilla here, who is my fantastic colleague who's leading the research team, who have worked tirelessly and into the depths of all of these assessments, and she's going to take us through this benchmark and the findings. Please note that you can ask questions in the Q&A box. So that's not the chat box, but the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. And we do have 15 minutes allotted at the end of the Q&A, at the end of the session, sorry, for the Q&A. Please also note that this session is going to be recorded. So anyone that's here now and wants to watch back, also those that haven't been able to make it, we will forward this and make sure that everybody has the invite, and everyone who signed up, will have all the recordings at the end. So with that and the practicalities, let us get started. Just a few opening remarks. As I say, then we'll hear the depth and the detail and the content from my colleague Pernilla. But as I said, this is the second iteration of the financial system benchmark that we've produced at the WBA. So we do see this as an important piece of work. We've looked carefully at the interlinkages and the levers within the financial system. We've really explored how best to align financial flows towards a more resilient and sustainable economy. And we've looked for the action that is taking place and how businesses are stepping forward to future-proof their activities. And on that note, importantly, we do see examples within the benchmark of financial institutions that are taking a system change mindset that does go beyond and well beyond compliance. There are financial institutions already showing what is possible and providing learning examples or potential blueprints for others who are more in a business as usual thinking. Saying that, although we recognize the progress made by the leaders, the vast majority of the financial institutions that we're assessing are still seeing sustainability through a narrow lens. We don't yet see a system that is really leveraging its potential and connecting capital to real economy transformations. We don't yet see that many financial institutions undertaking science-based transition plan or taking clear steps towards a just transition that values people and planet. We have, however, seen tangible progress from financial institutions in understanding and assessing the impacts on nature. And we do think that that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to use this progress and jump off this to increase the wider understanding and recognition of the value of all capitals, not just natural, but also the social and human capitals that are key to this whole system working. We've also seen a number of companies and a much higher number of companies who are starting to embed risk and opportunities linked to sustainability into decision-making. And we recognize that although this is a step forward, there is still a great need for collaboration and innovation to create the solutions and the opportunities to really accelerate market action at the pace and scale. And alongside this need for partnership, collaboration, we do also really see a need for smart regulation to empower this action and to really embed this value into the system. As a final point of my opening remarks, it was an honor to hold a space for more than 70 leading financial institutions, companies, and policymakers in Davos in January when we launched the first assessments of this benchmark. We saw in that room that there were signals that indicate that some financial institutions are evolving, and there are more and more who are focused on linking these sustainability topics to their business risk and opportunity. And so with this in-person meeting in January and now this global launch, we're very happy to share the findings of the benchmark. And before we get to that from Pernilla, I'd like to invite Mark from Capitals Coalition to also provide some initial comments and reflections. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Nikki, and welcome everyone. I don't know whether if you're like me, the first thing I do whenever I see a benchmark is I try and see where I am on that benchmark. Well, that isn't necessarily the most interesting thing from this benchmark here today, because what we're talking about here, the trends that we're seeing, particularly in the moment that we're in now, with the headwinds we're facing, with all the different turmoil, and not just in political spheres, in many spheres. Many of the businesses I'm talking to, the main thing they're concerned about is fiscal risk at the moment. So, you know, we've got disclosure pressures, we've got fiscal risk pressures, we've got so many things going on. But actually, what this benchmark shows us, which is so fascinating, is that as Nikki was saying, those leading organizations are taking that more systemic view. And it's that systemic view in the work that most of them have worked in some way with us on valuation as well. It's that view that they can take those risks, those opportunities, understand their dependencies and their impacts, and actually frame that in a way to help them to structure their decisions that they're making across their financial activities. It's that is actually allowing them to be at the forefront of this benchmark. And it's a great signal to all of those others out there that if you can understand those risks, and why would you not want to? I mean, if I can give you better information, surely you want that information. You don't want to make decisions with ill-informed data and things. So those organizations that can get that, can capture those externalities, can start putting that into the way they think. They're the ones that are really leading in this space. We launched back in 2017 a financial sector supplement that went on to become the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. When we launched that in 2017, no one turned up. No one was interested. The sector was very much thinking about different things. I'm really encouraged, even though the stats that we're going to see in a minute are not necessarily showing there's a lot going on. The momentum behind this, the people that we're talking to, even on our advisory panel this year, we've had more financial institutions wanting to take part and to take part in some of the conversations and work we're doing. There's opportunity here. And if any sector is good at trying to find an opportunity, it's the finance sector. So I'm really excited about this. I think what we're doing here today is an anchor. It's a way of connecting up all of the things that we're doing in a space when there's lots of turmoil going on. So using this benchmark as a place to lift off from, to take us further forward, a lodestone to help us to know where we're going to be going next. So on that, I'll hand over now to you, Pernilla.
Thank you so much. I hope you can now all see my screen. Oh.
It's just coming, Pernilla. There we go.
Okay, great. So I'm honored to be here today to present to you the findings from our financial system benchmark. And as Nikki alluded to, this is the second iteration. The previous one was from 2022. I will include a small comparison later in the presentation. So if you are not familiar with the World Benchmarking Alliance, we are looking into the sustainability impacts from the business sector across 7 system transformations. With the financial system, as you may see from this wheel, is embracing them all. So we see that the SDGs can only be achieved through a transformation and change of systems where businesses play a key role, and of course that the financial system impacts all other sectors. The financial system benchmark is including 400 financial institutions, and they represent together an estimated $200 trillion of decision making. To get a bit more into the composition of this benchmark, We have 37% banks, 23% asset owners, 22% asset managers, and 18% insurance companies. And as you can see, asset owners and asset managers are divided into pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and development financial institutions. And asset managers, we have the managers of traditional assets, alternative assets, and also investment consultants. In terms of ownership, about half are publicly listed, while between a fourth and a fifth are government and private each. You can also see from this map that the financial institutions are spread across the globe. When it comes to what we measure, we have 5 measurement areas. This year, it's a bit of a change compared to 2022 for those who are familiar with us. So we have strategy, governance, and stewardship representing 20%, and then the rest is shared between social aspects, 45%, and environmental aspects, 35%. And within those, we have 25% in each of the 2 that are dedicated to the financial activities, while the remaining percentages, both on social and environmental side, are referring more to the operation and supply chain of these institutions. A bit on the financial system benchmark, what it is. We are independently selecting keystone companies and assessing them. The indicators are divided into elements. We have also, we assess them based on predefined criteria. And the basis for all assessment is publicly available data, which are disclosed by financial institutions themselves. The assessment is performed by our team, but we do share draft assessments for feedback, and we do a detailed review based on this feedback, and also doing consistency checks. And all results are publicly and freely available alongside scorecards and rankings. And the benchmark embrace almost 50,000 data points. To have a bit of a better understanding of what this benchmark is about, when we look at results. So in the strategy and governance and stewardship area, we look at impact, materiality, and strategy, targets, plans, governance, stewardship, lobbying, and political engagement topics. On the respect for climate and nature on the financing part, we are looking at both climate and nature impacts, both from a positive impact, negative impact, and engagement angle. And then within the category of environmental footprints at this point, that is more clearly defined, as you know, for carbon emissions. So we are looking at the organizational carbon footprint and also net zero and 1.5 C-aligned climate targets. On the social side, and if you're familiar with our benchmark from last year, this is last time. This is an area that we have given much more emphasis this year. So we look at resources for underrepresented group, for underrepresented businesses and enterprises, low income and lower middle income countries, and also financial impact on workers from financial activities, as well as just transition. Then to the right, we have the respect for individuals and society, the area responsible business conduct, which consists of corporate human rights, responsibility, decent work, and business ethics. This area is something that we look at across the 2,000 companies that WBA is assessing, so that we have a comparison with also other sectors. Before going into any details, I would like to start with guiding you through our key findings. There are 5 of them. So the first thing that we saw on a more high level is that despite the majority of leadership having a responsibility for sustainability, because we can see that over 60% of institutions are actually assessing, actually assigning responsibility for implementing sustainability across their organization and to their leadership. We can see that only 1% are presenting an evidence-based strategy where they link their financing activities to their material impacts. So we can see that there is a clear need to link finance decisions to real-world impact. The second thing that we wanted to highlight is that we see that the private finance is critical for sustainable development, but at current levels of support and capital, that is barely visible. We know there is this funding gap of nearly 4 trillion a year for sustainable development in emerging markets. However, we can see that only 6% of the institutions that we assessed expressed their financing support to low and lower middle income countries. So there is clearly a great potential for improvement there. When it comes to transition planning, we saw that just 3% of the financial institutions have established, or at least share that they have established transition plans, while we also could see that there is this lack of transparency is serious, because there is the financial institutions when they plan, I should research that sentence. We could see that banks alone have financed fossil fuel by nearly 7 trillion since Paris Agreement, and also yet the 6 trillion is needed annually to finance the climate transition. So only having 3% with a transition plan is not where we need to be. Things looks a bit more promising, let's say, on the nature side, where we could see that starting from almost no one last time, 10% of financial institutions are identifying the impacts of their financial activities on nature. And that is, of course, an important starting point to be able to do something about this impact. And we can see that financial institutions are there just as good or better than other sectors. But still, that knowledge has to be transferred into action, and we could see that only 2% have plans to address this nature loss. So there is a lot to do also on that side. And then on the social side, we focused especially in our key finding on protecting workers' fundamental rights. So voluntary commitments to protect workers' fundamental rights are seldom reflected in the financing activities, and we could see that only 6% of financial institutions disclose that they have a process for identifying risk of workers' rights in relation to their financing activities. So this is another area that needs strengthening. By that, I wanted to go more into the detailed results, and I will start from the total results, go to measurement areas and specific sectors and geographies, and then finish off with a bit more details on some indicators or how we see things falling out there. So this is our benchmark result in summary. The best score out of 100 across all financial institutions was 43. The average score among them were 12.2. So there is apparently a room for improvement. You can see the distribution here. So we had 20 that were above 30. And you can see that quite many are, almost half are below 10. So let's look at this in a bit further detail. If you look here in this graph, you can see the highest score, the blue line, and then the bars representing the average score. this is a distribution across publicly listed, government-owned and private institutions. And you can see that the publicly listed ones are scoring a bit better and also above the average of the total benchmark, while government are on par and privately owned are falling a bit behind. If you instead look across regions, you can see that there is also quite a distribution here, and also apparently a gap between the average and the best scoring ones. What you can see here is that Europe and Central Asia, mostly European companies, are leading the way together with sub-Saharan African financial institutions. And then the rest is following the East Asia Pacific, followed by North America, South Asia, and Middle East, North Africa, scoring the least. If we instead look at the distribution per sector, you can see that banks are scoring best, followed by insurance companies, asset owners, and asset managers, almost on par. If you instead look into further details for the asset owners and asset managers, you can see that the development finance institutions are scoring the best, while pension funds and sovereign wealth funds are not doing that well. And also in the asset manager, you can see that traditional asset managers and investment consultants are scoring better, leaving alternative asset managers behind. If we then go into the different measurement areas, we can see that strategy, governance, and stewardship is almost on par with the overall average, with environmental footprints and responsible business conduct, those measurement areas that focus more on the internal operation and the supply chains are getting better scores, while those focusing on the financial activities for nature and for social purposes, respectively, are falling a bit behind. So this stresses the importance of improvement in those areas. If we instead look at the measurement areas scores by sector, we can see that banks are consistently scoring higher across all measurement areas, and also followed by the insurance companies. So the pattern from the total results is also reflected in the measurement area results. Looking at measurement areas by region, and there are a lot of bars here because there are several regions, we can see that European institutions are the ones scoring better in governance and environmental domains, with sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America leading in inclusive finance and also scoring relatively high on responsible business conduct. But we can see quite a variety here. So let's go to the comparison between sectors. So if we go and look at each sector and each different measurement area results, we can see there is the scores are below 25 consistently, and in most cases below 20. So there are obviously substantial improvement potential for all across all measurement areas, and in particular, as we saw for the overall score for asset owners and asset managers. However, again, if we go and detail the asset owners and the asset managers, we can see that the picture gets more complex. And again, we see this pattern with development financial institutions scoring at the top and in average being above 25 out of 100. And I should stress that these results that you see here is before we have put on the weighting of the measurement areas. So this is the pure measurement area results. So in this more detailed mood presentation, we can see that the development finance institutions are performing better in inclusive finance in particular. And maybe that's not surprising, but we can also see that they need to catch up on their carbon emissions. Here are the results after weighting. So you can see here that the banks are still scoring better. The same pattern emerge here. But you can also see that after taking weighting into account, asset managers and asset owners are almost on par with each other at the average level of around 8, but a bit different composition. So we can see asset owners being a bit better on the financing of climate and nature side, while the asset managers are scoring a bit better on the responsible business conduct, which is their responsibility in relation to their employees and so forth. Human rights, business ethics. And again, if we look at those total scores after the weighting, we can see that investment consultants coming up here almost at the level of the insurance companies, while we can see clearly how the alternative asset managers are the least performing group. And again, just to mention that the overall score is 100, and we are reaching a level in average here of 20 for the best performing group. If we then go back to regions, we can see that there is a similar patterns between some of them across the different measurement areas. But we can also see quite some variation. So, for instance, the pattern we talked about originally, or in the beginning of the presentation, that the financial activities scoring are lower than those focusing on internal operations and so forth. That is also something we can see across some regions, but we can also see, for instance, in South Asia here, in the Middle East, that the weakest here is the environmental footprints. So while measurement area composition differs between regions, we can see that scores are not following a global north-south logic. So it's possible to score better and to make progress on these indicators and on your work on sustainability, independent of where you are in the world, or at least independent of region.
Nilla, just to flag, as you requested, 10 minutes. Thank
you. So if we look then at the total score distribution after the weighting, we can see that the patterns become more clear. The Sub-Saharan Africa and Europeans are leading, followed by Latin American. That was what we sort of pattern we saw before, but we also can see that with East Asia and Pacific having performing improved, shows an improved performance in when also taking into account the weighting, while Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia are the ones that fall a bit further behind. If we combine regions and sectors, we could also see that we could see something happening, especially in North America, where we can see that the banks are actually a bit better than the average, while other parts of the sectors is behind. And in this combined view of regions and sectors, we can see that North American banks are catching up with European and Sub-Saharan banks. This is, of course, a 2024 view, so we will see what happens during 2025. We have seen some unfortunate cutbacks on environmental targets and so forth. So leaving the stats of the different groups, subsectors and regions for now, let's go into the indicators and elements. So when we look at, and I don't want you to look into all of the details here, it's more to show you the patterns. You can see that if you look at the indicator, each indicator has a potential score of 1. This is the average score per indicator, and as you can see here, the average score is going from around 0.55 down to 0. So it's a great variation depending on topic. When we look at the highest scoring indicators here, and we are at the level of coming from 53.5 or 0.53 down to 22. This is normalized. And then comparing that with the lowest scoring one, where we are going from 3.2 down to 0.4. What we can see in these groups is that the majority of the highest scoring ones are referring to the measurement area on responsible business conduct and also to governance. So we can see things like a grievance mechanism for workers, governance, allocation of responsibility, and so forth in this area. When we come to the lowest scoring ones, we see more indicators popping up from the more finance-related topics. So that is a quite clear pattern. And also when you look into further indicators, that becomes even more clear. If we then go to the elements, and again, I don't want you to look at all the details, but just to give you an idea how the distribution is also very patchy when you go down to the element level. And similar to what we could see on the indicator side, what we see on the element side is also that the highest scoring ones, so the highest scoring one of all is that the assessed entity assigns responsibility for implementing its sustainability strategy within the company. And the second one is that decision-making and oversight responsibility is assigned to the highest governance body. So it's very much focused on governance processes and so forth, while what we see here on the other side is very much action on the floor, so to speak. In particular, we see several which are related to that the assessed entity progress is in line with its targets, and it's also much more focused on the financial activities as such in this side. If we do a quick recap to compare with our results in 2022, we could see here how things have improved for the most improved indicators and elements. So we can see here that we have a level of almost 75 more companies or financial institutions have improved on some indicators. So that is quite some improvement. And these are in relation to the areas presented here. The yellow ones are indicators that are more focused on the financial activities. So here we could, for instance, see that the highest governance body responsibility for the sustainability strategy is the one that has increased the most, followed by a senior executive remuneration and grievance mechanism. On the financial side, we see that transparency regarding provision to fossil fuel sectors is something that has increased. Climate engagement, addressing pay gaps, gender balance, health and commitment to respect the health and safety of workers and ILO fundamental rights, and then the 1.5C aligned interim climate targets is also something that has progressed. And down to where we see no provision of products, services and capital for new fossil fuel projects. That has also increased, but if you would do a extrapolation from the increase rate or the increase step that has happened since last iteration and translate that into years, we could see that at current rate that the board level responsibility for sustainability strategy that would become 100% in 4 years if you could extrapolate that way. But if you look at the level of progress when it comes to committing to new provision of products and services or capital for new fossil fuel projects, it would take another 50 years already to get this commitment for new fossil fuel projects, let alone other fossil fuel projects. So apparently that is not at the rate that is needed, but I think that is a way of thinking that could be quite informative. We also looked at the correlation between the governance activities and the other measurement areas. So here we have the financing of climate and nature and the inclusive finance on the left, and to the right we have the environmental footprints and the responsible business conduct. And what I wanted you to take away from this picture is that we can see the stronger correlation here on the environmental footprints and responsible business conduct, while having a strategy while having the strategy and governance and stewardship in place is less predictive when it comes to the financing activities. My second from last slide. So I also wanted to point to some opportunities. So what we can see here, the dark blue, blackish part of the diagram, that is showing the extent to which financial institutions are disclosing on a certain topic, while the lighter blue is showing to what extent they have scored positively on the same topic. And you can see that both of those are having quite a patchy behavior, but you can also see that there is a gap between what companies disclose at this point and what we could score them positively for. So I think these gaps are interesting because they note that there is an interest in specific topics, and so there is also an opportunity to detail information regarding these topics. And that includes, in particular, personal data protection fundamentals, impact materiality and strategy, governance and incentives, responsible tax fundamentals, commitment to respect the human rights of workers, net zero and 1.5C aligned climate targets, identifying human rights risks and impact for financial activities, and organizational carbon footprint, impact targets and plans. We can also see which ones are the lowest, representing the lowest disclosure level. So apparently that could be more done there. Downstream living wages and policy and strategy, resources for nature positive solutions, resources for low income and low and middle income countries, reduction of negative impacts on nature, working hours fundamentals, integrating and acting on human rights risk and impact assessment, and so forth. So those are areas which are to large extent, again, related to the financing activities. So it's time for some final reflections before we start the Q&A. So my reflections are after having looking into this material, there is a great opportunity for improvement across all assessed institutions and sectors and regions, but there are also definitely some leaders and laggards can still learn from these leaders, even if all need to improve. And while progress is noted on several indicators, the speed is insufficient, as we showed, in relation to the urgent human and planetary challenges that the world is facing. Regional diversity and scores, sustainability progress can be made across regions, so this is not something which is only relevant for some region. Top 10 scorers include institutions across sectors, showing that there are opportunities to perform well, independent of which sector you belong to. Governance and allocation of responsibility is important, but only takes us so far. Financial institutions need to strengthen their sustainability focus on the impacts their financial activities have to become a driver of systemic change. And then financial institutions can improve their scores by becoming more stringent in their reporting of topics that financial institutions already show interest in and disclose. So by that, I leave the word back to Nikki. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pernilla, for taking us through. As we said at the beginning, we do have some time now for Q&A, and we do actually have some questions that have come into the chat. So maybe I'm going to just go through those right now. Maybe Pernilla, this first one for you is, how were the 400 keystone financial institutions selected?
Yeah, so that is a combination of hard and soft criteria, or quantitative and qualitative criteria. So what we're after is to measure influence, how influential they are. So we do set thresholds in terms of, or when they were originally selected, we set thresholds in terms of revenue and assets under management. But then we combine that with also looking at things like activity level, how their importance in different regions and such parameters, which are more subjective in that sense, and try to combine them.
Thank you, Pernilla. And I think it's someone called Stephanie who was asking that question. We'll put our details at the end of this webinar, and if you want to reach out with further questions around that, but also we do have details and a breakdown of criteria on the World Benchmarking Alliance website, defining those keystone principles that Pernilla was talking about. So there's a bit more data we can dig into, but in the interest of time, I'm going to have a look here. So we've got, Pernilla, there's a question around the performance difference in scores between asset managers owners and asset owners and banks. And the question is whether banks are being assessed only on their own operations and their direct business lending, while asset managers are assessed on their full investment portfolio, their funds. So maybe, Pernilla, whether you have an inkling or a view on kind of as the data behind that, kind of the scope of the assessment. Thank you.
So for each financial institution that we assessed, we are looking at them first to mention that we are looking at a group level. So also when we categorize them as, for instance, a bank, it may be a bank that also has an insurance business. So we are looking at where their most prominent business is. But in relation to the types of business that they are performing, so if you are a bank, for instance, we are looking both at their lending side and their investment side, and we would do the same across for each type of company that we look at. So we are trying to capture the overall. Then we are looking at disclosures in relation to the aggregated level. So we are not performing a detailed assessment of, say, all the funds that are part of a portfolio. We don't have that capacity, but also we are trying to represent a wide group of stakeholders. So we also think the transparency at the aggregated level has a value in itself.
Interesting. There's also a question around, well, comment actually, from what I can see. Obviously, there's plenty more questions coming in, but a comment around transition planning. And Pernilla, I'm not sure if you're comfortable on the spot or whether we want to dig into. We do have, so there's a reference here that Bloomberg's assessments of 600 financial institutions found that 80% had a transition plan, at least some, the comment here is at least some information across all 5 pillars of the GFAN's Net Zero Transition Plan framework. And there's a comment to say that lots of this information is in reports that don't just call it a transition plan, but in the annual report, the TCFD report, etc. So I think there's 2 parts to that question. There's maybe a clarification, Pernilla, on the fact that we do look at a full range of reports. So you could maybe say, you know, where does the research team get that data from? And the second part of that question is more this discrepancy, potential discrepancy between our findings and others, and whether we already have some insights or view on those differences.
Yeah, so very interesting question. Thank you so much. I have not looked into the Bloomberg, so I cannot answer in detail. But what we are looking at is publicly available information. So if the Bloomberg study is more relying on information from that are shared with the assessor, then that could be one reason. But also in relation to what you said, we are absolutely looking at different types of documents. So annual reports, sustainability reports, responsible investment reports, and also web pages and so forth. But we also, when we are looking for a transition plan, we are looking for something which is indeed a plan. So we are not taking different parts of content that could be associated as a transition plan and bring it together and conclude that there is a transition plan. But we want companies to be transparently referring to one, whether they call it a plan or they could call it something else. But it should be clear that this is an intentional piece of planning work that is happening. I should also mention on that this year, when we assess again, which we will do, the indicator that we have in the financial system benchmark is looking at the existence of a transition plan, putting not very detailed and specific criteria for what it should be composed of. We are also, through our climate team, doing a specific assessment building on the ACT methodology, ACT core, to look into transition plans more in detail across the 2,000 companies that WBA is assessing. So there will be further details on that for the coming round.
Thank you. And I think it's a takeaway for us as well. I know that data is new from Bloomberg, and they are someone that we do work closely with. So I think we have the good relationships with those teams, and they are a WBA ally. And we're looking together with Bloomberg on the some of that data. So I think that's a takeaway for us as well, to look into those two findings, and maybe if they're different companies or different ways of assessing the companies. Thank you. And there's an interesting one, and maybe it could be Pernilla, but if I could also, maybe Mark, you also want to come in on this, because you mentioned in opening remarks around the starting point of TNFD and the kind of the opportunity side and the development we are seeing around nature. And the question comes, it's saying, considering target 15 of the Global Biodiversity Framework that asks FIs to disclose the impacts, dependencies, risk and opportunities on nature by 2030, have financial institutions indicated why the progress on this has been slow, and why would it take nearly 40 years? And I think there's some interesting reflections to maybe we suggest we're not that pessimistic right now on that timeline. So maybe Mark, I'll come to you, because you've seen a lot of acceleration in that.
Yes, there has, and the target 15 was obviously a really important milestone in this space. We managed to take almost 1,000 businesses to Montreal in the negotiations of that, and they were involved, financial institutions and other businesses involved in helping to form this. We haven't seen as much progress as we would like in that space, and I think it will be interesting to see what happens over this next year. But there are organizations that are very, very aware that call for dependencies and impacts and the risks and opportunities that comes through that is something that is there for 2030 in the future. Business for Nature, I think, is one of our partners here, obviously in this community, is one of the best places to go for the latest on where we are with target 15. And I'd probably recommend people head towards that to see what the latest movements are.
Fantastic. Yes, and it's a topic, we've been working with, as you say, we're collectively here, but with Business for Nature as well. It's a key actor, and one that we are, because we do have a data point. You've talked about that from the financial institutions perspective, but interestingly with the WBA Nature benchmark, we have a data point on that, on the 800 companies. So those two pieces. But your point being, Mark, I think it's going to be, what does it look like in the coming year's assessment? And we have seen some progress, and we will reassess these companies on this topic. So I think that's that will give us a bit more of an indication, whoever was asking the question, of really, are we on that kind of change curve of 40 years, or are we accelerating with all the work with Global Biodiversity Frameworks, TNFD, etc., and the consolidation, a lot of the work that we're doing, pushing this forward. So yes, maybe Pernilla, yes.
On that note, Nikki, that we have started to look a bit into memberships or financial institutions that are members of or allies of different main initiatives on both nature and climate, and we can definitely see that it's useful, and that those financial institutions are performing better. That we are in the middle of that assessment, so we don't have any details, but I think collaboration is something that helps.
I know we've just got 5 minutes, and I wondered if, well, Mark, did you have any other comments? You don't have to, but I'm kind of opening it up there. There's a few other questions in the chat. I'll just say, on a very practical point, there's some questions around having the slides. Yes, we can certainly share that out. I think in our last few minutes, we're going to share, as I said, the recording will be sent out to everyone. But if you also want to reach out with further questions, comments or the wanting more details, the slides, etc., we're also going to share that our contact details for that. Maybe we do have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to quickly dig into a few more questions. Yeah, Mark, please.
Nakia, I just one of the questions I saw there from Claire, I think it was about how do we hold organizations accountable in this process? And maybe it's just good to be a bit of clarification. I mean, what WBA is doing isn't an accountability process as such, but what it is doing is setting out the information. So maybe a little bit more about that would be good.
On how we can,
yes,
yeah, no, very good point. So as you say, we've got the data, which is one side of it, and it's important that we do have these insights and data, so we're not kind of looking at what we think is the case, but really what the facts are behind it. But absolutely, Mark, the key other pivot and a pillar of that, and that's actually where my role comes in, is the engagement side. So that is very much, there are different levers for change and accountability. There's some, not so much on the accountability, but there's a lever of learning pathway, company space for, there's already maybe an appetite around some topics to learn more. And then there's key organizations that the World Benchmarking Alliance can work with the data to enable more learning spaces and more learning opportunities with companies themselves. And those best practices are really key in that. Showing what is possible is really key to help enable others to learn. Saying that, not every company has the appetite to do it. That's where the accountability comes in. There's a layer then of potential pressure in some cases on some topics. We've seen actually on other topics outside of the financial system, we've seen the financial institutions themselves engaging, pushing, accelerating action on other sustainability topics. So putting pressure on companies. Stewardship is one of the topics, for instance, that is assessed in the financial system benchmark, but it's also one of the levers for change to hold companies accountable. And then at least in our approach and our thinking from a WBA perspective, it's then about policy and regulation. It's the norm setting. So the accountability mechanism, ultimately having policies and regulation that we're not going to always turn to regulation, and it's always going to take time, and there might be different versions of regulation which are incentivizing change, but not having that layer of regulation alongside the pressure, alongside the learning spaces, we don't see a full picture of where we can bring accountability. And we have to admit that right now, that's a challenging space that we're in, and I think we should be open about that.
Which is why we both, as well, World Benchmarking Alliance and the Capitals Coalition, were joint founders of the Global Commons Alliance Accountability Accelerator to try and create that, which isn't just pointing fingers. It's a support network on accountability, because with accountability, actually everyone needs to be involved. It's not just the regulators, it's the corporations, it's the NGOs, and everyone has an equal responsibility in that, I think. Yeah. So there are mechanisms that we're working on, obviously, together to make that work.
Yeah.
May I just mention quickly on that note that when we are sending back, when we are publishing the scorecards, we always include our comments. So there is a rationale for why someone is scored positively and someone is negatively scored. And we do that because we think there is a learning opportunity, because we want to help companies to advance as well.
Very good point. So on that point, if there are others in the chat or others that you know that are still really driving this forward, or have the want to be involved in those learning spaces, the pressure or that regulatory work, you know, you've got people here who are pushing that forward and that you can reach out. So I think Dip, we've just got 1 minute left. So my colleague Dip, who's on the line. Yeah, we wanted to wrap up in this last minute. Thank you so much again, Capitals Coalition. Mark, you've hosted us today. Thank you, Pernilla, for running us through a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of things, that nuggets of information that different people will take out of this. I would like to say that at the moment, what you can find already publicly available is the full 400 data set and the 400 assessments, as Pernilla said, per company information about those 400 financial institutions. That's on the World Benchmarking Alliance website, but there will be a further deep dive report going into a bit more of what Pernilla just presented, but different angles around that. And that's coming out end of April or around this kind of timeline. So again, even if you had questions or things that you might think are useful, you could be sharing that as feedback. If you're in the financial institution, financial system benchmark, please keep an eye out for an invite for further information sessions. We are reassessing this year. So 400 financial institutions will be reassessed in 2025, with the third iteration of the benchmark being published in January 2026, with actually full insights into all 2,000 companies that we are looking at. Thanks again for being here. The recording will be shared, and please do not hesitate to reach out to those contacts that you have here on the screen. We'll finish it up there. Thank you.